Well, good morning and welcome to the Belong Collective. We're so glad you're here for this opportunity to connect digitally to, I guess, kind of like a gathering that we would typically have. And my name is Justin Douglas. I'm lead pastor at the Belong Collective. Today, we're going to have some announcements. I'm going to have a prayer, and then we're going to have a life connection time, which is our teaching time or our kind of sermon. So first, to start with some announcements, this week we launched TBC Helps, the Belong Collective Helps, and an update on that. Some of the things we did, if you're not familiar with this, if you didn't see this happen this week, is our landing page of our website is now an opportunity for people to express a need that they have. Primarily what we're looking to do is deliver prescriptions and deliver groceries to those who are in the high at-risk population for COVID-19. And so, and what we're trying to do is then pair them with volunteers who are maybe in the lower risk category who can run out to the grocery store and make that run, or run to the pharmacy and make that run for them. And so we launched that this week. And with that, we had one food delivery this week. We had multiple volunteers sign up, but we had one food delivery. And we expect that that will probably expand as word gets out, but then also as the longer this lasts. If this lasts a long time, I'm sure needs are going to arise amidst that. And so we want to do anything we can to help in this time. So if you know anyone who is in maybe that elderly population or that immunocompromised population who is interested in having their prescriptions picked up, or that's a need that they don't have anyone to do that for them, please make them aware. They just need to go to thebelongcollective.org. There's a form they can fill out there. It's just typing in their name and information, letting us know a little bit of details. And from there, we can pair them with a volunteer who could run out and get that stuff for them and deliver it in a safe way. We've talked to doctors about how best to do that, even to make sure that this is actually helping and it's not hurting amidst the quarantine. And so the goal is that those individuals who are most at risk would stay at home. And so what we're trying to do is that if you have any potential of connecting people to that, please let us know. If you want to volunteer, you can sign up. Certainly, if you've already volunteered and you're like, nothing's happened, we're hopeful that there will be more need expressed in the coming days. And so stay tuned. We have your email. We're going to let you know as there's opportunities to connect. And again, we did have one food delivery this week. Now, we're also talking with Bethesda. Bethesda Mission in Harrisburg is something that we've been connected to as a community, as a faith community for quite some time. One of the things we've done, I've been on it multiple times myself, is the Bethesda Mobile Mission. You've probably heard this over and over again in our gatherings when we say, like, we're going out this week at Friday night at midnight. Usually is when we go out for the Bethesda Mobile Mission. Well, due to COVID-19, Bethesda Mobile Mission has had to cease its operations. Bethesda's had to kind of determine what they're going to focus on amidst this, just with all of their resources being placed in one particular area. And so we are working to kind of take over certain dates of Bethesda Mobile Mission and run that wholly ourselves. And so this last Friday, we did Bethesda Mobile Mission. Allie mobilized a team and went and did that. We purchased all the food for Bethesda Mobile Mission. If you're not familiar with what Bethesda Mobile Mission is, it's serving the chronically homeless, and it serves them with a meal. And usually there's hygiene items as well in the mobile mission, but for this particular case, it was just a meal. And so there's multiple drop points throughout Harrisburg where kind of the homeless tend to congregate. And so we are going to be probably coming to you with an update in the next few days of probably just an interview with me and Allie to determine like what she thinks is best moving forward, of how we can help in that area, how we can expand that. It might be every week, it might be every other week that we go out. We're trying to determine that. We're also considering working with some other maybe small businesses who maybe are taking a hit, who can help prepare food. So we've got a lot of ideas in the hopper there, but stay tuned. Ultimately, we want you to know we're trying to find any way that the Belong Collective can step in the gap in a healthy, safe way and serve. And so stay tuned for more of that. We did open a TBC Helps Fund. So if you go to our online giving, so if you go to thebelongcollective.org and you see the give button in the top right, you can go there, and if you go there, there's a drop down bar there's general giving, and then there's a drop down bar that says TBC helps. And ultimately, this is going to be money that's going to be used to serve the most vulnerable in this time. And so if that's something that you want to support, if you want to support helping us buy food for things like Bethesda Mobile Mission, or to help food delivery, things like that, the need for people to have their pharmacy prescriptions picked up, things like that. It's ultimately all going to go to that. And so we encourage you, if maybe you have means and you want to help, but you maybe are immunocompromised, or maybe you're in an at-risk population, but you really want to help, and you have the means to do so, to maybe consider giving to TBC Helps. A few other things. We're going to try to use Zoom now this week, okay? I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zoom. Maybe some of you are like, I'm so familiar with Zoom now. Maybe work has had you on Zoom all week. But ultimately, Zoom is just a platform kind of similar to FaceTime, or similar to Skype. We're going to actually have our first kind of Connect gathering tonight at 6 p.m. And so what this simply means is, like, I'll be hosting the gathering. I've already posted links for it, but we'll start at 6 p.m. and we're only going to go to 7, but it's just an opportunity for us to see each other's faces, hear each other's voices. And again, even if you don't have the capability to log on to video and have a camera at you, you can call into the number. And so we even posted the number if you just want to call on the phone and listen. Ultimately, we're just going to kind of round table it and hear from everybody for a couple minutes, just an opportunity to connect with one another in a deeper way amidst everything we are going through right now. And so we're probably going to have some of those meetups on maybe twice a week basis. I don't know. I want to be careful to create any concrete systems right now, but for right now, we're going to start with tonight at 6 p.m. an opportunity to connect with one another. Now, I also want to use Zoom as a platform to have coffee time with Justin. And what I mean by coffee time with Justin, many of you have scheduled coffee appointments with me, and we've had the opportunity to just sit down and talk life for a little bit. And so what I would like to do is open the opportunity for you to let me know if you would like to just have a one-on-one with me for a little bit. We're probably going to have 30 minutes at a time or something like that. But I'm probably I'm not sure how to do this yet. I'm probably going to post a schedule of, like, here's the windows that I'm opening. And then you can kind of say, oh, I want that window, and I'll send you a Zoom invite. But I want to be available to you. I know some of you maybe would like some one-on-one time with your pastor right now, and yet we're in the quarantine, and that's a little bit difficult. I've definitely had some phone call conversations with some of you, but Zoom, I think, is just maybe going to be a little more intimate, a little more like we can actually see each other's faces. Like, it's a different vibe. And so if that's something you desperately need right now, please shoot me a message. But ultimately, that should be coming out in the next day or two. I should probably be posting, like, okay, here's the times I'll be available. Let's schedule this. Let's make this happen. Let's have some conversations via Zoom. So there's some announcements. Now, I thought it would be best to kind of, after announcements, just open up with a prayer, acknowledging kind of the situation that we're in. So would you join me in a prayer? Good and gracious God, be with us now in the midst of our quarantine. For some of us, you're joining us in the midst of loneliness, in the midst of fear, in the midst of anxiety, in the midst of sickness even. God, in the midst of mourning. God, may we feel your presence anew in this time, in this season. God, as we endure pain and suffering, however high that is in our particular place, or however low that might be compared to someone else's, God, may we feel that and lean to you with that. May we bring that suffering to you. May we rely on you in this season, in this time. God, we especially right now want to lift up the healthcare workers. So many people, the first responders that are running to the aid of others. God, the doctors and the nurses and the scientists who are working tirelessly right now to care for those and to also help find a cure. God, be with each and every one of them and their families as they're all making sacrifices. God, just continue to bless them. May they feel your presence. May they feel your love. And God, may you just give them ultimately your strength right now in this season as they need it. God, I especially even lift up those who maybe have already felt the economic impact of this, whether that is um, maybe they don't have as many opportunities at work right now. Maybe shifts are starting to dry up and it's just not as much opportunity to maybe even being laid off already, whether that's a temporary layoff or what it looks like to be a permanent layoff. God, I especially lift those individuals up to you, God. I pray that you would make a way in their experience and their story, that ultimately they would feel your presence and your power even caring for them in this moment, God. And God, we cannot forget all those who are sick right now, all those who are dealing with illness of any kind, but especially as we are aware, COVID-19, God. As this continues to spread, God, I pray that your healing power would be unleashed on this world. It is possible. You are ultimately powerful and able to heal. And so we pray that your healing would take place amidst this reality that we're experiencing, God. And we certainly lift up those who are mourning right now, those who have maybe lost a loved one to this. Um, God, be with them. May they feel your presence. And God, may they experience your love even amidst this deep pain that they're experiencing, God. And God, be with us, each and every one of us. May we make responsible decisions in this season. May we love our neighbor well, even by staying inside. May we see that as an act of love for our neighbor. And God, um, may you speak to the parts of us that are afraid. May anxiety and fear not win, but God, may your love conquer all. In the name of Jesus, amen. So, what we're going to do today is continue our series that we had been running through called Jesus Christ, Stop Putting Words in My Mouth. And it's kind of a play on the idea that there's a lot of words and a lot of phrases that we put into the mouth of Jesus. And today's words are, "You're too far gone to belong." Now, this is actually a statement that I don't really think is said very frequently, but it's definitely something that as I've been in church life, it's something we believe, and we believe about ourselves and we believe about others. And it's kind of something within church culture that I would say is an idea that something you've done in the past maybe has disqualified you from belonging. And so I guess let's begin personally. Have you ever heard that inner voice, that kind of inner enemy voice that is kind of that incriminating voice that's bringing up that like incriminating thing that maybe is in your past or something that you felt guilty for, that tells you you're not good enough, that seems to bring about all the worst things to the surface? Usually it's that voice that brings about this idea that maybe internalizes over time and that allows you to believe, and even others to believe about you, that you're too far gone to belong. At the same time, some of us have experienced actual faith communities that have believed this about us or about others, and we really just want to talk about this particular thing today. And so there's this book that Will Davis published called 10 Things Jesus Never Said. And in that book, he kind of talks about this voice and about this exact kind of like idea. And when he talks about that, he says this. He talks about what that inner enemy voice might say, and here's what he says. Jesus certainly didn't die for the likes of you. You ever felt that, like talking to you? You may have friends or family who are Christians, but they never messed up like you have. You're crazy to think that God still wants you. You're damaged goods. You've gone too far. How dare you think that God might be willing to forgive you? How arrogant can you be? He gave you one chance after another, and now that you've blown it royally, you think he's just going to forgive everything and call it even? No way. He's done with you. There are just some sins God won't forgive. There are just some people he won't ever pardon. And guess what? You're one of them. And this is kind of that voice that can kind of kick into our mind and make us feel like, oh my goodness, this is right. I am too far gone. I've just done too much. And the question I have for us today, I think for us to ponder is like, is this how Jesus interacts with us? Is this our relationship with Jesus? And my answer would be pretty simply no. Like, as we look at the life, ministry, and teaching of Jesus, it's so wild that we would call ourselves followers of Jesus and like or desire to be followers of Jesus and think we're disqualified when we see how many people he allowed to follow him, how many people ultimately were qualified. Like, it's like, wow, okay, interesting that Jesus would allow these individuals to follow him, but we would think we are too far gone. And so today, I think there's one particular passage. I mean, there's a number of passages you could go to show that you're never too far gone to belong. But ultimately, I think there's one passage that really stands out to me, and that is in John chapter 8. And here's how it goes. Jesus went across to Mount Olives, but he was soon back in the temple. Swarms of people came to him. He sat down and taught them. So Jesus is at the temple now, and swarms of people are coming to him. And here's the deal. If swarms of people are coming to him in the temple, they're not coming to other people that they're typically there for, which are the religious leaders. And so swarms of people are coming to Jesus instead of coming to the religious leaders. And they don't take this too well. And here's how the passage continues. The religion scholars and Pharisees led in a woman who had been caught in an act of adultery. They stood her in plain sight of everyone and said, "Teacher, this woman was caught red-handed in the act of adultery. Moses in the law gives orders to stone such persons. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something incriminating so they could bring charges against him. Now, this is the perfect trap, kind of, because the reality is they're bringing this woman in who ultimately Jesus is now in a public place, a very public place. His ministry is very public at this moment. He's preaching the gospel of good news and inclusion to all these people that previously were not included. And so you can kind of see how this is a lose-lose for Jesus. He's in the temple, which is this like icon of purity, yet he's kind of in a public setting in his ministry, and now he's had this woman who's brought an adultery to him. It's a lose-lose situation because Jesus has been preaching this love for sinners, this inclusion of even like the worst of the worst, the tax collectors, and now that is being put up against the law of Moses, like the Old Testament law, and like this would have been like a huge clash for him. So they've placed kind of the love of people up against the love of the law, kind of, and like, which side will he choose? And the truth is, like, if he fails to uphold the law of Moses, he's a fraud teacher. But if he fails to uphold kind of the gospel that he's been teaching and the love of sinners, like, he's also a fraud teacher. It's just like, which side is he going to be a fraud teacher on? Because he says he's about the Old Testament and the law, but he also says he's about loving others and including others and radical forgiveness and grace even for like the worst. And so what is Jesus going to do? This is a huge lose-lose for him. Now, let's talk about the Old Testament context. Let's talk about the passage from Leviticus where this comes from, just so we can understand that there is real precedent for this. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. There's a lot of context around this passage that we're not going to get into today, but ultimately it's just to show you that for Jesus, this was a real Levitical law that ultimately would have been something that people would have understood as point blank. If you commit adultery, you're to be punished for that crime, and the punishment is stoning. And I mean, I think it's very interesting in this particular case that the religious leaders just bring the woman, and they don't bring the man. I mean, that's pretty interesting. But the law is clear that this is what you do. Now, the interesting thing about the situation that these Jewish leaders are in is that they cannot commit capital punishment on their own. This is something that, being occupied by Rome at the time, Rome would have actually been the one who held the power for capital punishment. So while the Jewish people had a certain amount of autonomy in governing, which Rome allowed, the idea of capital punishment was something that ultimately they had to go to Rome for. I mean, we even see this in the crucifixion of Jesus. Ultimately, it is the Jewish leaders who kind of placed Jesus in the position to be crucified, but it is Rome that actually follows through on the execution. And so even the idea of executing at this particular point, we don't even know that would have been something that, like, Rome would have probably intervened. There would have been punishments if someone would have had a random stoning in the temple, for example, or even if they would have walked this woman outside of the temple and there would have been a stoning. So it's interesting that they're advocating for the stoning of this woman when likely the law as they understand it isn't even something that would allow for them to do that. But maybe they think Jesus doesn't know that. Maybe they think, hey, maybe we'll trap Jesus because he'll either say, no, we can't stone this woman, or he will, and then Rome will be the ones who step in and ultimately take charge. I don't know, but ultimately at this time, Rome was in charge of executions if they were to take place under the Jewish law, which is interesting as Jesus is kind of being tossed this curveball, this test, this test that they've brought to him to try to trap him. So the story continues in verse 6. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger in the dirt. They kept at him, badgering him. They kept at him, badgering him. Jesus just takes a break. Like, in the middle of this hot debate, in the middle of this trap, Jesus takes a break. And what does he take a break to do? I guess sand art. Like, like, I don't know what's going on. Jesus is like drawing or playing in the sand. And I think it's very interesting. Jesus is in a high stress situation here. Let's not forget that Jesus is a human being being put in this very public trap. And the first thing he does in this situation is he pauses. He pauses. And I think sometimes when we're in high stress situations, sometimes just pausing and taking a breath can be the best thing we can do. You know, love is patient. And sometimes, even when we find ourselves in these moments of high stress, taking a deep breath, being patient, I don't know, maybe going outside and playing in the sand. But ultimately, Jesus seems comfortable taking his time, thinking about how he wants to answer this question, thinking about how he wants to act in this moment, which I think just reveals to us that maybe sometimes when we are in these high pressure moments where we feel pulled by two different directions and feel maybe even trapped, to take a breath and not be afraid to take the time necessary. All right, next in verse 7 and 8, here's what we have. He straightened up and said, "The sinless one among you go first. Throw the stone." Bending down again, he wrote some more in the dirt. So Jesus doesn't undercut the Levitical law, but ultimately what he's doing is he's kind of exposing the Pharisees' self-righteousness. He's at least ensuring that doesn't allow that to go unchecked. So he's like, hey, if any of you are sinless, you guys are so pure, like you guys got it all together. Hey, if you've got it all together, go ahead. Whichever one of you has it all together, throw a stone. Like, it's a very, very... I don't know, like kind of Jedi mind trick type deal. Like, just he like weaves his way out of this in that particular way. And I think it's important to also remember the context. Sometimes it's good to create a picture in our head of like how this story was going down. And Jesus is in a large crowd. There's a large crowd here. They're in the temple. They're in this place of purity. And so to declare yourself sinless in the temple, in this place of purity, like, it would have had all kinds of implications. I don't know about you guys, if you've ever been at church and you said a lie at church and someone was like, don't lie at church. It's like, well, don't lie anywhere. Like, lying's bad, but ultimately, like, we sometimes have in our mind this idea that if we lie in church, it's worse. I don't know that there's a whole lot of merit to that, but ultimately at this particular time, the holiest of the holy places was the temple. And so to be so self-righteous, to say I'm sinless in the midst of this particular holy place, like, that would be pretty arrogant. And not only would it be pretty arrogant, but it would be pretty arrogant, and you would be doing it in such a public way with so many individuals around. And now also Jesus is flipping it on them so that they can throw the first stone. And so there's also another factor here of when Rome comes knocking on the door of whoever's responsible for this woman's execution, it's no longer going to just be Jesus. Like, they're going to be implicated because they have now threw stones. Like, that's what Jesus is trying to get them to do, to throw these stones. And so Jesus has turned this lose-lose situation that was on him onto them almost. And so this is a really great way of looking at Jesus' ministry, just particularly this story, because what Jesus does here is a third way. He finds a third way amidst a very binary way of seeing this situation. Either Jesus is going to be pro-law or pro-gospel and love and inclusion. And what Jesus does here is kind of says, no, I'm not going to live in that binary world that y'all live in. Like, I'm going to weave a third way into this. And for us, I think it can be really helpful for us to consider how we can creatively approach the very binary situations that exist in our world to try to weave in a third way when it is possible. And notice, even in this passage, it says that Jesus is still writing in the dirt. Very interesting. So Jesus is still drawing in the sand, and here's what John 8:9-11 says. Hearing that, they walked away, one after another, beginning with the oldest. The woman was left alone. Jesus stood up and spoke to her. Woman, where are they? Does no one condemn you? No one, Master. They all walk away. Oldest first. Obviously, there's some wisdom there, I think. But ultimately, no one is left condemning her. Like, the humiliation that it was for her to be dragged through the streets into the temple in front of everyone, ultimately is now placed on these men as they walk away one by one, probably with their tails between their legs as they were trying to trap Jesus. And Jesus, in doing this, is restoring the dignity of this woman. They all leave one by one. They're not willing to throw a stone. They're not willing to really put their money where their mouth is on this law that they were trying so hard to uphold and trap Jesus in. And then the story ends this way. Neither do I, said Jesus. Neither do I condemn you. Go on your way. From now on, don't sin. Jesus sees her. Jesus saves her. Jesus forgives her. And Jesus calls her to a higher purpose. We're left with all kinds of questions at the end of this story. Like, what did Jesus say next? Was there anything else? Like, where did this woman go? Did she just go back to her life? Did she sin anymore? Like, I think that's usually the question of, like, Jesus says, go and sin no more. But it's not like Jesus said, this is your get out of jail free card. Like, this is your one chance. And if you ever sin again, you're like, you should be stoned. Or like, Jesus doesn't make this declarative, go sin no more or else. It's, I'm giving you an opening into something new, into something better, into a better purpose than the purpose in which you've been living. I'm inputting dignity back into your life, even by what I've done today. Don't waste this opportunity. Take full advantage of this moment. And Jesus does so in such a non-shaming way. This isn't about shaming her for what she's done. This is about inviting her to belong in and be included in something so incredibly new and expansive in grace and mercy and love. I just think about the people standing there that day watching this transpire. Imagine you just happen to be going to the temple that day and you see this all take place. like how much does that change your view of God? You watch it take place. Imagine being a disciple of Jesus and being like, oh man, an adulterous woman, we know it, where she belongs. Like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't stone her, but like we know who she is and what she's about, and this isn't for her. But then you see Jesus stand up for her, like include her, not condemn her. That's a pretty transformative experience as a disciple following Jesus. And I think about the woman and what she experiences. What transformation must it be for her to experience this moment unlike any moment she's probably experienced? To have a man step up for her, to have a man like shield her from this, to have, in this particular culture, this is a shocking narrative. For her to have dignity placed upon her as an adulterer, like, no, that's not how this works in this honor shame culture. And so Jesus in this story is reminding us that everyone like belongs. Everyone's invited to this party. Now, he's writing in the sand, and we never get any answers on that either. So like as you close out this, you're like, hold on, but what was he writing in the sand? Hold on. Like I need to know what Jesus was writing in the sand. And there's all kinds of speculation about what Jesus might have wrote in the sand. Was it an Old Testament passage that he wrote in the sand, an Old Testament character? I mean, some people say it could be a passage from Hosea, because Hosea is this really provocative story about a prophet having to go marry an adulterous woman. And like, it's a huge story of like God's grace and expansive love for his people. And so we get to this point of like, well, wonder what he was writing. And then there's some who even say like, maybe he was writing his mother's name in the sand. And when you think of it like that, you're like, whoa. I mean, we're just coming out of Christmas just a few months ago, and it's like, yeah, like Mary was thought of as an adulterer. Like that's what people thought. Like that's what even her family would have thought given the circumstance. And so would that have followed his mother around as he was growing up and seeing how she was treated as, an adulterer, as someone who had, you know, had a child without being married? Like this image, this picture that ultimately in this culture would have been something that she would have carried with her, and that Jesus might have even seen the consequences of her carrying that with her, and even identified with this woman in a way in which he even identifies with his mother. It's very interesting to think that even that could be what he's writing in the sand. Ultimately, we'll never know, but I have to believe it has to do something with this expansive grace that he models within the story. So here's the lie that we sometimes believe: you're too far gone to belong. This is the lie that we have, that voice in our head that tells us maybe, or that thing that we just can't ever seem to get out of our mind that we did back then, that ultimately kind of haunts us and that we kind of keep churning over and coming back to, that tells us, oh, you're not qualified enough. This isn't for you. That is the lie. And here is the truth: you're never too far gone to belong. You're never too far gone to belong. This should radically transform you. Like, it should radically transform, first and foremost, our view of Jesus. That Jesus speaks over our lives, over our story, over our destiny, that you're never too far gone to belong. But also it should radically transform our view of ourself, that like we are worthy of redemption, that like there can be a new chapter to our story, that what happened back there doesn't have to define what happens next. And it should also radically transform our view of others, that no one is too far gone to belong, that like Jesus' invitation is not just for me. It's for everyone. It's for the person that gets under my skin. It's for the person that I think is ultimately, of all the people I know on this planet, the furthest from God. Like Jesus has not given up on that person. They are not too far gone to belong to this community of grace. We're all invited, and that expansive grace is for each and every one of us. The love of Jesus has no boundaries, and it is relentless in its pursuit, and we celebrate that. We celebrate that. It transforms our view of people that are difficult. It transforms our view of our enemy, even. As Jesus tells us to love our enemies, he knows that none of our enemies are too far gone to belong. Forgiveness, grace, and mercy, it's on the table for everyone. This is ultimately the good news of Jesus. So that inner voice that tells you that you're defined by your past mistakes, don't give that inner voice any more credibility. Move past that. Jesus declares you are never too far gone to belong. May we believe it, and may it transform us. Would you pray with me? Good and gracious God, I pray for those who are listening that maybe have listened to that voice. Maybe as I read at the opening, that kind of passage from that book that shared all those different ways that that voice talks to us and convinces us that we are defined by our past. Maybe for them that got really real. Like they've heard that voice, they've heard those statements, and maybe even believed that about themselves. God, I pray that by your Spirit right now, they would feel your love, feel your grace, feel your mercy in their life, and that ultimately they would know there's nothing in their past that they've done that defines them. Ultimately, they are a child of God, first and foremost an image bearer of the Almighty. And God, you seek to redeem their story. There is a new chapter on the horizon if they grab hold of it, God. And so give them a vision of how expansive your grace is in their story, and your love for them, may they feel it. And God, if we're here and we've ever bought into the idea that others are too far gone to belong, transform our view of our neighbor. Remind us that we're called to love our neighbor and we're called to love our enemy, which ultimately means we're called to love everyone. Expand our love for others. Expand our love for our neighbor and expand our love for our enemy. May we see everyone as someone that is part of your plan, God, and that ultimately is treasured within your plan, God. God, may we never believe that the person that we dislike is too far gone to belong, but may we hope for the best in their story. God, bring us to that kind of love for everyone that we interact with, God. And even more, if we've come to see Jesus as giving us that get out of jail free card and then holding it over our head, or if we've come to see God as a God with a lightning bolt in the sky looking to strike us down the moment we make a mistake, allow this story in John chapter 8 to transform that view, that we don't serve a God full of vengeance, but we serve a God full of love, a God who seeks to find any and every way to redeem us, a God who is in relentless pursuit of us moment after moment. May we feel that, may we know that, and may we ultimately believe that about the character of the God that we serve. In the name of Jesus, amen.